Last year he had all
Hello everyone, welcome to our first annual Sports Communication Panel and Careers. Just thanks everyone for coming out and registering beforehand. Thank you to our speakers, of course. I want to get it started so we can open up to questions and stuff, but I'll pass it off to the professor. He's going to introduce our speakers.
All right, folks, thank you much, and how about a round of applause for Michael and the PRSSA for setting this up. They worked very hard for this. For anybody who doesn't know what the PRSSA is, that's the Public Relations Student Society in America. This also is being sponsored by our communication department. If you want any information on that, it's all in the back there. Even if you're majoring in something now, you can always minor in communication as well. So that's the shameless plug. No more from me, I promise. We're going to switch over to our panelists right now. So first up, we have George Falkowski. George, come on down, please. George spent more than 30 years in sports and news television, most notably with the New England Sports Network. You may know it as NESN, where he was a feature producer for the Boston Red Sox and Boston Bruins from 85 to 95. And as a sports and anchor reporter and news reporter from News 12 New Jersey, George is also an adjunct professor here. We're happy to have him. And also a winner of the Distinguished Alumni Award. So a round of applause for George.
You guys will also see my flag on the way out.
George, you go down the
Oh, wait, sure.
Up next, we have Chris Brienza. Chris Brienza oversees Coin PR sports and media practices, as well as the agency's New York City offices. To Coin PR, Chris brings nearly 20 years of experience at the senior level PR level, as well as media relations. Chris has previously worked with the New York Knicks, the NBA, the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars, now known as the Red Bulls, as well as writing for Runner's World, Bicycling Backpacker, and Mountain Bike. So again, another round of applause.
Two of the other panelists here on a regular basis.
There we are. The world is small, folks. You'd be surprised. Up next, we have another adjunct professor here at Kean University. We'd like to welcome Mr. Jerry Barca. He is an author and film producer. He has produced and appears in the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary Catholics versus Conflicts, which debuted just this past December. His writing has been published in the New York Times, essay.com, ESPN.com, and is a regular contributor to Forbes, where he blogs about leadership in sports. So again, another round of applause for Mr. Barca. And last but not least, our last panelist, also an alum of the university, Al Dukes is the executive producer of the Boomer and Carton radio show, heard weekday mornings from 6 to 10 a.m. on New York Sports Leader, WFAN. Began his broadcasting career producing sports talk programs in Tampa, Florida. has worked on both WNEW-FM as well as K-Rock, very active on Twitter, and again, a graduate of the university. So once more, welcome for Al Hughes. So as I run over there and connect with you guys, the first question is, did you want to be a sports guy when you grew up, or did you kind of grow into that? Think about that as I run over there and then hear me on this? Okay, so we'll keep our microphones right about here. So let's start with the first question. How did you end up to be where you are today?
You got to hand it to me. That's
Yeah.
how this works. As a distinguished alumnus of this fine university, I'm here to tell you that I failed my major in my first semester. I did. I was going to be an art major. I failed basic drawing, which is hysterical because I've gone on to do some Christmas cards, a couple of books. I illustrated stuff for Sports Channel and New England Sports Network, a lot of cartoon caricatures and stuff. But I failed drawing. And I stumbled around, taking a lot of general ed courses to build up my credits and get my GPA back where it had to be. And I thought I was going to transfer to Northeastern. I was ready to go. Journalism. I got accepted. I visited Boston. I fell in love. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go to Boston. No money to go. And I had started taking communications classes here. I didn't even realize we had it at the time. All the building, it was all hidden away in Vaughan Ames. And all of a sudden, I'm taking journalism, I'm taking communications, and I'm on a radio station, and I'm writing a column for the paper, and I'm doing a cartoon strip for the paper. And I landed an internship with Stan Fischler. So if any hockey people are here that know Stan is still doing his thing with MSG Network. And that's how it started. I went from there to Nesson for 10 years. I got my master's in Boston, up at Emerson. Came back, Sports Channel again, which is now MSG Plus. I was here for the 95 Cup run, which was fabulous. Got fired 2 months later. New guy came in. And 4 months after that, I landed at News 12. And I was there for 18 years until a layoff 3 years ago. That's the way TV shakes out. And I'm doing this again. I've taught before. I'm teaching again. And I'm looking to do more, maybe start a little video-based business this summer and try to get my income back where it belongs. But it's been a good long run and a lot of fun. And I think all these guys will probably second that motion.
Fantastic. Chris, how about yourself? Did you dream sports PR way back when? Or?
I dreamt about working in sports. PR was an accident.
Okay.
Total accident. But my goal was to be a broadcaster. So I went to NYU, majored in broadcasting, got a job out of college at the Star-Ledger, covering high school sports, mostly soccer, and everyone covers football. And then got a job at MSG Network in production, and I hated it. Like, this is my major. I hated it. It was a vanity-driven business, and it just, for me, was not what I expected. So, quit my job, drove across country, got a job driving a cab, and worked a bunch of odd jobs trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I had been working in college. I had been working game nights for the Knicks. So I worked college basketball on Knicks game nights, and then just by being there and not being a total jerk, I got to know a lot of the NBA people. And at the time, this was 1988.
Was this an internship? Or?
It was a part-time job.
Okay.
And I got to know the NBA people just by handing them their credentials as they entered every night. And they had a job opening for a writer, writing propaganda, basically, editorial content. And I interviewed and got the job. And that's how I ended up in PR. It was totally accidentally. But what I found was it wasn't that much different. Like, it's journalism, but it's just on a different side of the fence. And if you're doing it right, like, you're not lying ever. You're trying to help people do their jobs right. But I found it to be a rewarding experience, and I've gotten to do things I never would have gotten to do otherwise. So it's been great. And I think a lot of you who are in broadcasting or regular journalism will find yourselves working PR jobs at some point. And it's not a bad thing, by the way. So
Interesting. Jerry, how about yourself?
Well, at first, I think it's funny that you said you weren't a jerk, because I was teaching a class earlier today, and I used a different word than jerk in class. Jack, don't be mad at me. But I said, part of being successful is to not be a jerk to people, and it does open up doors. So that's great. I was supposed to win the Heisman Trophy at Notre Dame. I mean, that
kind of like this book right about
that was the dream. There's not many 5'7" quarterbacks that win the Heisman Trophy in recent years, at least. So when that dream faded, I always wanted to work in sports. When I went to college, I worked for the sports information department in day one, and my career has gone in a lot of different places, bouncing between journalism. I really started out in sports PR with after college, the Detroit Lions, and then at Syracuse, and then journalism, and then even a little bit of political PR. But just in the last 7 years or so, I've focused in on sports storytelling and been lucky enough to be able to keep doing that.
So, fascinating. Al, how about yourself?
I commuted to Kane here every day listening to Howard Stern. That's what I wanted to do. I thought that seems like a great job. I didn't think I could be Howard Stern, but I thought, well, I could work on a show like that. So I worked my way up. I ended up working at WNEW with Opie and Anthony. And then when their show kind of blew up for censorship and that sort of thing, those shows went away. And really for talk radio, it was politics or sports. I couldn't fathom caring or reading or talking about politics, so I wound up doing sports. And that's the way I just, and working on a morning show, you could be a little more loose with sports, and it's not just hardcore sports talk, but more kind of goofy sports stuff. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Any folks have questions, feel free to always raise your hand. This is an open session. We're here for you folks. We have some prepared ones, but we'd love to hear from you as well. Anybody have any questions they want to share to start off? Okay, a little quiet. We'll get them. Don't worry. First question is this. How do you keep your fandom as a sports fan out of your professional life? Or do they really go hand in hand and have the passion to be able to meet the grind of this kind of field?
It's hard to believe. The only teams people ask, what's your favorite team? And my answer is always, whoever I have money on. Like, I've learned not to.
We're going to be paying you maybe to.
Not like if I'm gambling.
Oh, okay.
Because otherwise.
I heard that the NFL is going to Vegas.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like I grew up, obviously, hardcore fan of the Knicks, Mets, just all the locals, basically, except for the Yankees. But now, like, you learn from being in PR, you stop rooting for, like, there's a level of professionalism you have to keep.
Mm-hmm.
I started, when I worked at the NBA, I rooted for buildings, like, where we had, like, enough media seating and hotels, mm-hmm. For media rather than teams. So it's weird. I got deprogrammed. So
does it happen over time, or do you
it happened over time for me? Yeah. It didn't take too long either. So now it's just like, I root for whoever I think, honestly, like if I go to Vegas and there's a spread that I like that's my favorite team.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, the rest of you, how do you separate it, or is it integral for the industry?
I grew up a crazy fan. When the Giants punter Sean Landeta, which none of you would know, missed a punt in Chicago, I threw up Cheese Whiz as a 9-year-old. I was that much of a fan. I cried over a Notre Dame loss in the Cotton Bowl when my favorite player had his towel taken off his waist. But professionally, I think for me, it's when you get very close to the subjects. Having worked in sports PR, they're people. It's the fandom kind of goes out the way. And then in journalism, it's just to be professional, you're not a fan. And it's interesting because I think of I'm very boring to my friends that I grew up with. They don't like the fact that the fandom's been stripped away because I really don't care. I don't even, some people you'll say in sports journalism will talk about, I root for team content, whatever's going to give me content, which is, I'm sure that works. I think there's always content. As long as they're playing, you're always going to have content. But I think it's just something that I think of a Bronx Tale when he talks about Mickey Mantle,
sure.
The kid liking his baseball cards. Mm-hmm. And I viewed it much more as a profession and what stories I can tell. Now, the irony is I've been lucky enough, my first 2 books have been about the teams of my childhood. So I've been lucky that way, but maybe that was just early reporting. I don't know.
For anybody who's not familiar, the name of those books are, Jared? Go ahead, please.
Rather shamelessly plug now. It's Unbeatable, which is available in paperback, and Big Blue Wrecking Crew, which Amazon in hardcover has brought down to $10.85 today. So if you're looking for that early Father's Day present, you can get it on Prime with available shipping.
So if you have a Wi-Fi connection, folks, get busy. Yes.
And working at WFAN, we're the local sports station, so I root for every New York team because when a team stinks like the Knicks do right now, it's bad news for us because we have nothing to talk about. Because people, at some point, it's fun to talk about your team sucking until it goes on for months after months after months. Then it's really just the same stuff every day.
George?
I have a very unique take on this because I grew up, obviously, a Jersey kid, so I'm a big Yankee fan growing up. And then I land with the Devils and Stan Fischler and Sports Channel the first year of their existence. I'm loving all that. And then I go to Boston, and I wind up working for Nesson. It happens to be the parent team or the parent network of the Red Sox and the Bruins. So, wow. It's like God's having a sense of humor with me here. I did 10 years with them, 1 year with the Mets, actually, at Sports Channel. So God is laughing the whole time, pushing my career along. And I learned a very important lesson. I remember my boss from Nesson, he knew I was a Yankee fan growing up. And I was cool because I was doing stories for Red Sox fans, and I understood the relationship and I understood the rivalry. So I never had a problem doing stories that a Boston fan, hockey or baseball, would appreciate. In fact, I was accused the last day I was leaving after I was resigned. A guy shook my hand and called me an SOB.
Really?
And I'm like, why? And he says, you became one of us. And I'm like, okay. But the boss said to me very clearly, he said, George, you root for the team whose logo is on your paycheck. Now, deep down, way down, I'm still a Giants fan. Having been affected personally by the baseball strike in '94 when so many people could have lost their livelihoods, we did not, fortunately. My take on Major League Baseball changed, but I still enjoy watching the Yankees, and I love going to Fenway, and I've been to fantasy camp twice just to go be goofy for a week and be a little kid again. So I'm more of a baseball fan now. But yeah, I can still root, but when it came to covering them, I think at News 12, the theory was pretty simple. If the team was winning, you flew the flag. And you celebrated it. But if they were having a bad time, you're from Jersey, man. You got to give it to them. And you get your little sarcasm and your little shots and you take your little pot. And that's just the way it goes. I always felt that I was representing you guys from New Jersey. And if you were pissed off at the Giants, I was pissed off. If you were pissed off at the Jets, I was pissed off at the Jets. So maybe it's a good thing I haven't been there in 3.5 years the way the Devils have been playing, because that'd be a field day. But that's just the way you do it. You know, if you can separate it, great. And I think you have to, because you have to be able to cover the story. You have to, if a player that you like and admire is having a bad time, you got to be able to call it like it is. You can't pretend that it's not happening and go, oh, everything's great, even though he's having a bad year. If he's having a bad year, you got to say it. So you got to find that. You got to find that safe ground and try to enjoy the sport like I have always, and I still do. But when you have to call it like it is, you better be able to call it like it is. So that's the best thing I can tell you.
George, I think you hit a really interesting point there. And again, any questions, folks, feel free to raise your hand. We'll call upon you. But you hit on the idea of storytelling. And just get this one in and we'll go to the question. Yeah, Rob.
I was going to say, what is the most difficult aspect of sports PR? Like, what's the most challenging thing for you?
Most challenging aspect of sports PR.
I guess the PR guys got to handle this one, right?
Yeah. By default, we come to you.
Well, I can tell you from mine what it's like.
When your team is terrible, because a lot of when ultimately so much is really determined by what happens on the field or on the court. I've worked in basketball and soccer. If your team's good, you'd be amazed how good the coverage is. And when your team's bad, it's the PR. You know, what are you guys doing, man? Like, you got to help us get good coverage, and people can see what the truth is. So it's hard. Like, you're trying to. That's why it's super important to be honest and deal with people in a professional way. Help them do their job as well. The best example I can give is, I'm going to go back to when I worked in the NBA, which was 100 years ago. But the Dallas Mavericks were terrible for years. This is before Mark Cuban bought the team.
Pre-Nowitzki and crew?
Yeah, it was just before Dirk. Don Carter still on the team. He was a wonderfully nice guy, but the team was terrible. They were an awful team, but the guys who ran PR were so good and treated people so well that I remember I was with the Knicks, so this was 95. I remember Marv Albert saying, like, you know, you want to rip a team like this? He said, but these guys are so good to deal with, like it makes me think twice.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that means they've done as good a job as you could hope for.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you made media think twice about ripping a horrible team because they got treated so well. So now the head of PR for that team went on to become director of communications for the White House, and he ran NBC Sports. Kevin Sullivan, he's as good as they come. So, treat people well, do your job professionally, and like it'll buy you. It might buy you a break.
Other folks have questions. Feel free to shout them out. Yeah, sir.
Yeah, I want to know, as far as statistics and analytics of any sport, whether it be football, hockey, basketball, would you put more, value in that over being able to be spontaneous, like on radio shows? I'm a big fan of your show, my partner, and although they know, the stats and everything, there's a lot of personality aspect to it as well. So I want to know, like, as far as the balance goes, what would you say is more important?
For what we do in the morning, we don't really follow statistics much at all. We're more for what's the story that somebody that's a casual sports fan. I mean, we can't survive just reaching hardcore sports fans. We wouldn't survive. We need to reach people who are kind of casual sports fans. So even though you might not be a Knicks fan and never watch the Knicks, you might be interested in knowing one of their legendary players was physically thrown out of the game of the Garden. So that's a story that you don't need to be a Knicks fan to be able to follow, and that's what we have to do for our radio show in order to reach a more mass audience than just a Knicks fan. So on times when we get caught up sometimes in these statistical debates, I mean, we really don't do that in the morning. They kind of do that a little more throughout the day on the station, but in the morning, we're competing with Z100 and Hot 97 and 105, and we got a lot of competition in the morning. I can't be doing stats, really.
Other folks have questions? Or anybody else want to chime in on that one, on the panel?
As a sports guy, yeah, I can.
Briefly, yeah, sure, George.
Well, people of a certain age, we're kind of caught betwixt and between. First, there's the new technology and the social media, the power of that. But this analytics craze, I watch MLB Network pretty regularly. And they have a guy, former ESPN guy named Brian Kenny, who was like freaking math guy, and it's the point where you feel like you're listening to like some kind of calculus class when you watch a show. And it's like, stop it already. I don't know what a WHA, PPTT,
sabermetrics and things.
Yeah, it's just too much. But you can't deny that it's part of the game. It's part of the coverage. My job as a sportscaster, when I was the 18 years I was at News 12, much like you do with the show in the morning, is you can't be hardcore. All right. One of the great compliments I used to receive was the fact that women liked my sportscast. And I'm like, well, because I made it funny, I made it lighthearted, I try to find something cute to put in. I'd get a player. I had Marty Brodeur once giving me advice on becoming a new father. I ran the sound. People loved it, But it's stuff that appeals to everybody. Now, when we're doing the Jersey Sports Final, which was our Sunday night show, you might dip into statistics from today's Giants and Jets games because the people who are watching are more focused on that. You have to know your audience. But I'm telling you, if you just do a generic sportscast, if you watch 2, 4, 5, 7, 11, and these guys are pouring into stats and analytics, you're going to lose people because only the hardest core sports fans like that. And you have to realize that you might be that way, but not everybody else is. And you have to, again, it's the same thing. It's striking the balance fan, and it's knowing what your audience wants and knowing who's watching. And I think as long as you have a good grip of who's listening or who's watching what you're doing, then you can hopefully adjust your delivery to appeal to those people.
I think you hit on something there, and I just want to point this out. Obviously, the optic of our panel is very male-driven, right? But the fact of the matter is, I look in the audience, there's plenty of women in the audience as well. How has sports changed as a field to open up opportunities? Where have you seen diversification, be it in radio and TV and PR and journalism? Where are the opportunities there for women as well in sports? Open to the entire panel.
We've actually, in 2 of my classes that I teach, I'm at 3 colleges all over New Jersey, so if you enroll someplace, you'll find me. We've talked about women in sports, and how much it's changed since the 70s, really. And a lot of you, how many of you know who Susan Waldman is? She's from Boston. She does Yankee games. It's really kind of weird, John, if she has the accent. But Susan was on Broadway. Susan was an actress and a singer. And she got into WFAN in the mid-'80s. And there was a very famous incident in a Toronto locker room with George Bell, who was an MVP and a real hot-headed player, who said some very unkind things to her. This is 87. And he said, I'm not going to talk to you guys until she gets out of here, and I'm really cleaning it up at this point.
Thank you.
So she thought, okay, well, these sports writers are going to back me up. And they all looked at her like, are you going? So it's that moment, and I think we've all been there, where you just feel so alone and you're scared, and it's like you're on a life raft in the middle of the North Atlantic. And a voice in the back of the room said, I got 3 hits today, come talk to me. And it was Jesse Barfield, who played for the Yankees. So she staggered over towards Jesse, who had thrown her basically a life raft. And all the writers started to go towards him. And he said, no, I'm talking to Susan. When I'm done, you can come over. And to this day, she honors him. But there have been other incidents. Some of you will look up Lisa Olson, what she went through with the Patriots back in the 90s. She's come back and she's become very successful in the States again. But she had to leave the country to work in Australia for like 6 or 7 or 8 years because she couldn't work in the NFL because of what had happened with the Patriots incident, even though she had no fault in it. But what I tell my students when I bring them to Devils games and we do the dressing room, and hockey players, some of you guys know this, are the most polite, modest guys. They're not going to parade around. People like Susan and Lisa and Claire Smith, going back to the 70s and 80s, these women took the slings and arrows and bullets so you women won't have to.
So what does the landscape today look like?
It's better. There's more respect. I think as a culture we've evolved to the point where we just, it's not unusual to see a woman in the locker room. Now, some of the old school guys might still go, oh, what's she doing in the locker room? And that's going. That's disappearing. That's
far between.
Yeah, it's still there. Don't get me wrong. The people still have made comments. And I think the behavior of a woman reporter or an anchor is scrutinized more by the males, for good or bad, for whether it's right or wrong. They still do that. But it's changing. And the fact is that for you who want to get into sports media or sports PR or marketing, you have no idea what those who came before you went through so you could have this opportunity. It's an amazing thing. And there is a lot more diversity, and they want more women. And they want to appeal to the women in the audience to watch more baseball, more hockey, more football, more basketball, whatever it is. So be thankful. Look these people up, and at least if you don't know them, appreciate what they did for you. So,
gentlemen, if you want to chime in from a PR or journalism perspective in radio.
I also would point out that we're all white, and
True.
that part of the landscape also has to change.
Very true.
I think there are, yes, we're more accepting of having women in the locker room. Isn't that good of us to do? Pat us on the back. But I think, what you see now in certain sports stories, because people look to sports for so much. If you look at the Colin Kaepernick story that went on last season and continues now, there's a need to have multiple voices represented from a journalistic side of things, and you do see that. You see that more now. ESPN has its site, The Undefeated, on the writing side of things. It's critical that these stories are told, and that who the athletes are represented as journalists and vice versa. And quite frankly, that equity isn't there. There are opportunities. There's no doubt about that. But the equity across the board isn't there yet. And by looking out at this room, it's on you, if sports interests you, to pursue that and make sure that voice is heard and that different perspective is heard. Because in journalism, we're all going to bring our particular perspective to stories and how we cover things, and that's critical.
Fascinating stuff. Al, Chris, and Rachel.
Yeah, I look around. If you, in radio, I don't see a ton of women in sports radio, but they may just be smarter to go into television. But if you look on television and you look at panels, any of the shows that are debate shows or the pregame, postgame shows, they're filled with mostly ex-athletes who played the game, which makes sense. So those are always going to be men. But if you look at the other positions, every show I'm thinking of has a woman on it.
Very true.
So I don't really see that that's really an issue anymore. I mean, if you eliminate the ex-athletes who take most of those jobs, they're all going to be men. And there is an ethnic diversity with that, so it's not all white guys up there. So I think in sports it's actually pretty diverse.
How about for PR, Chris? What would you say?
Well, I was going to say I've never had, since I've been at an agency, right? My team has always predominantly been more female than male. But when I worked in sports, like for teams, it wasn't that way. Everything's changed, though, and I think a lot of it has to do, like Title IX is, 43 years now. It's changed a lot of things for the better, and it's continuing to get better, but there's still a ways to go. But PR is, I think, PR and marketing are two areas in sports in particular, and broadcasting to a degree, where women have been able to get hired. And in PR, it's getting better, I think.
Other folks, questions from the audience? Back there, yes.
You hear the phrase a lot, content is king. For each and every one of you, it's different, right? Al, you have the podcast going on with your show. Jerry, you're writing your features. Chris, you're doing press release stuff like that. George, features and stuff like that. Content to you moving forward, you hear that over and over again, content is king, content is king. Is there going to be a relationship where talent kind of goes down a little bit in ability and content still rises? What are your thoughts on the content?
Meaning, like, you don't need talent?
Yeah.
I think we're there.
We're there now.
Yeah, and I don't mean that, I guess I do mean that kind of negatively. Here's the good thing, right? There's so many new platforms that it gives everybody an opportunity to weigh in. So that's good. What's not so good is you don't necessarily have to be talented to weigh in. That's life.
That's a great point.
You know what I mean? So what are you going to do? I think ultimately the cream rises to the top. The good content will get more eyeballs than the bad content, you hope. So, and that will always be the case, I think.
Well, maybe you guys would agree with this. I'll throw it to you real quick. Would you agree that there are way too many people who think they're journalists, doing podcasts, doing blogs, and trying to be sports writers on different websites, where you got people that aren't trained? And I think you do need a certain amount of training. You have to understand protocol. You got to understand the way things work. And a lot of people just think that because they show up at a game, even if they're not even credentialed, that they, because they can get stats, they can go on the web and they can pull stuff off Twitter, they can be journalists. You all have smartphones. You all can broadcast live on Facebook. You can do all this stuff. But I still think you need a certain degree of ability. So while I think that absolutely correct about talent versus content, I think that you still need ability to a certain point. I mean, you guys kind of...
I'll just speak to my personal experience. I need to be able to write stories well, and there's still a market for my skills there. That has transferred in a way I wouldn't expect in the documentary films. The ESPN 30 for 30 is the second one, but now I'm working on 2 more and in development on 2 others, which is surprising, but you need to be for me, the skill set of being able to write is critical, and that's going to go to a lot of different places and being able to tell stories. So I think there's a lot of platforms where you don't necessarily have the talent. I think, it's a good place maybe to break yourself in and fail a little bit. I've done failed podcasts. I've done things that haven't worked for me. But what has worked for me is developing one skill that's transferable and seeing it move. But I do think to separate yourself, like your question about sabermetrics and stats, and as Al pointed to, he's trying to reach, and we're all trying to reach as big an audience as possible. And you can get sabermetrics just by asking Google, oftentimes. So you need to be able to separate yourself in some way. And for me, it's the writing. And I think it's, everybody has different skills in that area that need to be honed and continue to be developed. And that will separate you.
As a radio producer, I would take talent over content any day of the week. There are tons of guys on WFAN that know everything about every sports, and they don't get listeners because they're boring. And Craig, the guy I work with in the morning, gets criticized sometimes for, we'll get every stat wrong in the morning. He may not completely follow a story, but he's an entertaining guy. He will get more ears than the guy who knows his stuff, backwards and forwards. And that's a huge difference. I see a lot of guys at FAN, and they've sat there doing kind of part-time jobs for years and years and years, and they wonder, why don't I get my big break? Because you're missing that thing that a lot of people don't have, and very few people have it. And that is talent over content. Everybody's got the same content now. I can give a talk show host a ton of talent, a ton of content every morning. That's what I do. What they do with it and how entertaining they are is going to make a difference for in the radio world for sure.
Other folks, questions from the audience? Over in the corner there, yes, Michael.
From a day-to-day basis, you guys, some of you work day-to-day, like, you have the morning show every morning, and then the rest of our, you work on projects. What's the difference between working on a long 30 for 30 project and
Well, day to day, I just go to sleep at 7 o'clock at night. I hope something crazy went on the night before, or we've got to come up with something. So I'm just looking to get through every day. I'm not looking kind of long-term things. I'm not looking at trends that are developing over time. I'm looking at what can we do to fill 4 hours tomorrow morning. So I think I probably look at things a little different than Jerry.
I got 4 kids, and they're young and they like to kick my ass. So I've got that to deal with every day, as well as it is different. I mean, I think Al is talking about there's a daily routine and there's a rhythm and flow where one day I could be having a conference call about storyboards on a film, and the next day I'm doing 3 sets of pre-interviews to see if people can tell a good enough story to be on film. To the next day I'm talking to a sports psychologist who I'm working with on a team chemistry book to fill out a chapter. So it varies, but I think that's very unique to what I'm doing, but it is a much more longer term with less deadline oriented stuff.
Just real quickly, doing the daily show, I have such a crazy routine that any little thing that's different in my day, like doing this will throw me off a little bit. Because normally 4:30 I start to eat dinner, 5 o'clock I do this, 5:30 I watch PTI to catch up on the sports story. So I do that every single day ridiculously to the point where I have no life during the week because I do that to myself. But I think that's the difference with doing something every single day. And in the weird hours that I work, I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I kind of have to do everything in the same routine every day for me in order for that to work.
I think in each career, it's a little different. When I was working in regional sports, my life revolved around the Red Sox schedule. You could look and know when you had off 4 months in advance. You could ask for those days, and then the Bruins would kick in, and it was just a big circle. It was Bruins, Red Sox, Bruins, Red Sox, Bruins, and this is what you did. And your game day was going to be 10 to 12, 13, 14 hours, depending on what you were doing. You were going to the morning skate, 10 o'clock, you were coming back, so you had that routine. When I got to news, and I got to News 12, it was a different world altogether. You go where the story is. Maybe I'm working till I'm anchoring and I'm there till midnight on Monday, and then I got to do a story on the Rutgers women's crew team on Tuesday morning, and I got to be there to break it dawn. Mm-hmm. And so it's 4.5 hours of sleep and get up and go. So each career dictates what you're going to do. And one of the things I always try to impress on a lot of my students, some of you know this firsthand, is that we don't go home when the shift's over. We go home when the work's done. Mm-hmm. So if it's extra innings, too bad. If the Devils go to triple overtime in Dallas, you're working it. You can't just say, I got to go, okay? And part of that, of course, affects family. You've got 4, I've got 2. Both of my kids are hockey goalies. So in a strange way, being underemployed is working because I can take my daughter to her games on Saturday, and my wife can take my son. But I think we'll all agree that one of the great lines we've been able to use in our careers is, honey, I have to watch the game for work. We played that angle a couple of times over the years, but that's part of it. It's not a normal life. They don't play games 9 to 5, not too often. It's nights and weekends, so you better have people around you that support what you're doing and understand what you're doing. I'm first wife was a big sports fan, but she worked 9 to 5. That didn't work. Second wife, moderate sports fan, but has worked in TV, and because she did, I never had to explain why I had to travel for 7 weeks in 2003 with the Nets and Devils going to the finals. So it helps. It helps in a big way.
Chris, any insight into a day in the life of a sports PR professional?
Well, it's funny. When I worked for a team, I worked at both the team level and the league level.
Does it change team to league?
Yes.
Maybe an athlete working for themselves? How does that?
Well, as a guy I used to work with said very accurately, when you work for a team, you have good days and bad days, and it's usually predicated by how the team does. He said, when you work for the league, you only have bad days, which is not too far off, but I don't know if I go that far. It can be, especially if you work in baseball, which I think is just the hardest sport to work in. And I've never worked in it, by the way. It's every day. Every day. So you've got a 10-game homestand. That means the game could end at 11, If you're media, you've got to file. If you're print media, you're filing a story. If you're broadcast media, you might be filing a report from the stadium that airs at 11:20. You're putting other packages together, so you'll get out of there at, let's say, 12:30. If you're in the PR side, you're back in the office by 9 the next day, and that will continue for 10 straight days, so 9 to 1 every single day. It's long, long days. Pay is not, you're not going to get rich. Players are usually okay to deal with, but not always. Media, same. Like, it's a great life, but it is it's a grind too. So, you know, and that's just baseball homestands. So it's a long season and it's long, long days. It's a lot of work.
And then it's going on the road as well, right? I mean, that traveling secretary.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Anybody have a question? Yes, Taylor.
So yeah, having heard from your guys' schedules, you guys range from, like on a radio show, kind of very regimented schedules, like daily, working the same thing every day alongside baseball. Also with like kind of crazy schedules, is there a way, I guess, how do you guys prevent like burnout? Is it like entirely passion, or is the content like dynamic enough that?
Well, when you get fired, the burnout stops.
That's one way.
For me,
one way.
It's hard. You find what works for you. You know, like, it's not easy though. Especially depending, the lower you are on the totem pole, the harder it is to find that kind of groove where you can avoid the burnout. It's hard, you know.
Other folks want to chime in.
Well, I could speak to my experience at News 12, and one of the things and those are my students, someone's going to answer the question.
Okay.
We're doing a half-an-hour show, and there's breaking news, there's weather, there's a plane crashed or something. What's the first thing they cut? Sports. And it happens to this day. Any channel you watch, sports is not a priority. And with the current, they're still there, the people that got rid of me, but sports was never a priority, and they kept cutting us and cutting us and cutting us. We went from 3 guys and a freelancer to 2 and 1, and then it was me and the freelancer, and then it was just me for a year.
Briefly, do you think that's more at the local level of
No, I think that's anywhere. If they can they're going to cut, they're going to save money, they're going to go to sports first. Because, as it was explained to me by one of the guys that helps me with my career, he said that you spend too much money and they don't get enough of a return. Now, if the Devils go to the Stanley Cup, or the Giants go to the Super Bowl, or the Nets have a good run, or the Knicks are winning, then it's worth it because the average guy on the street is talking about the Knicks, the Devils, the Giants, and they care. But when it's just sports, they don't. So I got to the point where I was trying to keep up the same work pace of 3 people just by myself, and with some interns and cameramen having to act as reporters and we call it one-man band, go get sound at Rutgers, go get sound at the high school, take the intern with you, get sound. And when I finally got laid off, I don't think I stopped being tired for 6 months. Because and you guys know this, when you shut down, when your body finally accepts the fact that you're done, everything just goes, you crash. 6 months easy before I felt myself again, before I felt like I could get out and start looking for work. I was just totally burned out. But it's happened at least 2 other times in my career. But you hit the wall, you find a way to regenerate, to get that energy back, and then, because it's what we do. It's just, when I take students to Devils games, it's 10 o'clock, 10:30, I'm out running all of them. And I've been working 16 hours. And they're like, whoa, you're moving so fast. I'm like, it's just what we do. It's just what we do.
It's a very, very fast-paced industry. How about, for Jerry or Al? I mean, Al, you're doing day-to-day. Jerry, you're working these long projects. How do you manage all that?
Well, I think I'm at a point now where I've learned, you learn as you go. Doing this for a few years, you figure out what's going to work pacing-wise and what's not. And sometimes for me, there's a ton of work and there's travel, and I might travel 2 or 3 weeks. And I think, as was pointed out before, for me, I need a supportive environment. I need a very understanding wife and family setup, which I have. And it's just, you got to be able to adjust to it. But I mean, certainly, even on the sports PR side, when I work in sports info, you go to work at 9 o'clock. If you got the late game on ESPN, it starts at 9 o'clock in the Carrier Dome, and it's not over till 11, and then you're doing post stats and you're posting stuff to a website. Those are long, grinding days. And when you're younger, you can do that, because probably after that, you're going out, having a good time, and waking up and doing it again. But you figure it out along the way, I think, is the best way to do it, is you figure it out as you go. and you kind of take the temperature of what you can withstand, and if it's for you. Because also different institutions work differently. Like you were describing the Dallas Mavericks, some places are grinders, some organizations, some have fun, and you got managers and bosses that make sure you take time off, type of a situation. Now,
Yeah, I just keep a hardcore schedule during the week. And like I came here from the radio station, and I was excited to get here an hour early because I slept in my car for an hour. Caught myself a nice nap, and I'm like, all right, I'll be good to go.
we appreciate it. Thank you. Other folks, questions from the audience? Questions? How about this one, gentlemen? When you look at this, what keeps you going? I'm totally talking about some of the ugly truths now and the schedule and the grind. What keeps you going, and what are some advice you can give to some of the folks here that can see, well, I know this field is for me when blank happens? How do you know you've met the right fit?
I think when in this field, especially early on, just being able to take any shift or any job opportunity that's available. A lot of times people don't want to work terrible shifts, or people say to me, "Oh, how do you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning?" Well, there's like one job like that, so I could, it sucks when the alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and it stinks at 2 a.m. It stinks either way. So if it's a great job, just be able to take the bad things that come along with it.
I would say don't be stopped by anybody saying no. I've had multiple projects. People have said no, no, no. The ESPN 30 for 30 that just aired, ESPN said no for 3 years before saying yes. And that's the one thing confidence is critical, because you will get a lot of no's and a lot of people telling you you couldn't do it or you can't make the grind or something like that. I would say stay confident and don't let no stop you.
This actually might get some of you at work out of sports, but
oh no,
work with people who you like. A good work environment makes all the difference in the world. And I've worked jobs in sports where the people around me were not good people. I'm in a good spot now. I realized the last 10 years, you work with people you like and who are good, makes all the difference in the world. And it almost doesn't matter what you're doing if you like going to work every day, if you like working every day with the people alongside you. So it makes a big difference.
George?
Yeah, and to add to that, wherever you go, there's going to be good, there's going to be bad. There are going to be people that you can learn from positively. You could also learn from them negatively. I do not want to be like that person. I don't want to treat people like I just saw you do that. I'm not picking on you personally, but you get it. Find the good people in your operation. Surround yourself. Learn from them. Okay? Because if you find yourself, and the term, I think we've all used it, that guy's a real pro or she's a real pro. Mm-hmm. And you know that's somebody who's got your back, who you can deal with. A few of you have been to me with Devils games when we get to go in the MSG truck, and you see how professional those people are. There's no screaming. There's no yelling. Everything flows. It's amazing. And the other part of that, too, is you got to have your internal meter that says, here's the BS side and here's the good side. And you have to know when the BS is too much and it's time to do something else. You have to know, because it'll eat you up if you don't. But you've got to be ready. And if you have the right attitude and you follow good examples and you I didn't say imitate, learn from them. I learned from people up in Boston that did the Red Sox and Bruins for years. These were pros, number 6 market in the country. It was great. Those are lessons I took with me back to News 12. Learn from the best you can find. And always be the person that says, is there anything else you need before I go? Even if you don't mean it. Because the people around you will appreciate it. And once in a while they'll say, yes, can you stay? And I'll be like, oh, okay, smile, be of good cheer. But always be willing to do the extra work and always be willing to help and ask a lot of questions. That's the best I can come up with.
It's a good segue there, folks. Questions? Yes.
Suppose you come up with what you're sure is a brilliant idea for either a story or a PR marketing plan, but it's outside the box and the powers that be just aren't really getting it. You drop it, or do you have tips for spinning it the way they'll understand it and be behind it?
I can take that from a PR standpoint. There are plenty of times we have clients where we have great ideas for them, and it just doesn't. I trust you all keep this within this room. The Harlem Globetrotters are one of our clients.
Now, would you know, it is being recorded. So.
It is, all right. So We'll edit this part out.
We'll be right back, folks. We'll be right back.
All I'm going to say is they're undefeated during the time we've worked with them, so they're doing great. So we every year when we have meetings to talk about what we want to do this year, from a PR standpoint, the first thing on our list is always lose, right? Just lose one game. That's all we ask. We had it all worked out a couple of years ago. I won't go into details, but they didn't. The guy who was running the team at the time used to say, "I'm not ready to lose yet." You know, so it's like we can keep pressing it, but ultimately, they're our client. Like they're right, you know, and you push until you realize like it's not worth it, and you come up with a different idea. Is all, you know what I mean? But you keep that in your back pocket and hope there's a time for it. And I would say that's probably the same for a lot of story ideas too, you know.
Jerry or Al or George, maybe even Jerry with the 30 for 30, keep pushing for that finally come to be.
I think that's part is keep it in the back pocket. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with, you know, what you'd said earlier about relationships. If you have the relationship, when it comes time, you know, that idea will work as long as you're in that person's ear. So, you know, I wouldn't give up on the idea and, you know, keep it there, keep it in front of people gently, professionally, like a pro. And when the time comes, you'll be there ready to do it. I also think being able to execute the idea is critical. You need to be able to, everybody has ideas. Can you be the individual? Can you separate yourself by being the one who can execute on that plan?
Al, how open is the WFAN environment to...
Radio is very open because it's 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's 20 hours. You kind of can try everything and anything, and if it doesn't work, by the end of the week, everyone will forget because you had so many other hours of things that did work or didn't work. But yeah, we kind of just, the radio is a very strange thing in that we really don't have to clear much with anybody. You know, you kind of would get in trouble for things you did afterwards, but I don't ever walk down the hallway and say, can we do this? We just do it. And because there's so many hours to fill, it's kind of the last great thing where you don't really have to get permission for things. You know, they wouldn't let a DJ on the music station play 1 3-minute song on their own. Well, with radio, it's like, 4 hours, whatever you guys are going to do.
Quite the luxury.
It is quite a luxury.
George, chime in briefly.
I've got a specific and you know this because you're going up against people and you're trying to pitch an idea. And a lot of times you have this, and you know it's a great idea, you just know it. And they just don't get it. And you're trying to explain it to them. And the best example I can give for that is that we had a Friday Night Football, which still airs, was one of our premier shows.
It's on News 12?
On News 12. And I would always do a feature of the week or a big end-of-season story. And I remember pitching to management, I wanted to do a story about the Phillipsburg-Easton, Pennsylvania rivalry, which some of you are nodding your heads, you know about it. It's like 110 years old. They have to play it at Lafayette College because they can't handle the crowds. They get 16,000, 17,000 people on Thanksgiving morning. And I'm like, we got to do this story. They're like, well, it's not in our viewing area. I'm like, yeah, I know that, but it's a New Jersey school. It's a New Jersey high school football show. And everybody in the state knows about it, even if you don't. And that's hard because people get threatened when they don't know something that you know and they're a little higher on the food chain. You got to be real careful how you approach that stuff. But I pressed it, I got it. It ended up being one of the most successful pieces we ever did. But you have to make a compelling case.
Sure.
And then what also happens if you've been at a place a while and you've had some success and maybe you put some awards on the shelf and they know that, they're a little more likely to trust you. If your show's been successful for years and years, they're going to let you go because they know you've done good work. So it got to the point, luckily with me, it was like, let's let George go. He'll come back with something. And that's what you try to roll. You build up your credibility so that you can say, I have this idea, trust me. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It can be very, very frustrating when they don't understand what you're trying to get across to them. So it's just part of the business.
Other questions from the audience? We're almost out of time. Yes, Josh.
This question is for you, sir. What was your favorite part about working for Nessa?
See, he's brought his socks out there, right? Gonna go get some Jimmy's on your cone after that, bang a Yui, and get out there. Get some tonic for your freaking soda there. All right, I speak the language.
So I know we're short on time. So.
My favorite part of Nesson was actually getting to jump in the pool with two franchises that had so much history. Because I really, as a Yankee fan growing up, you're drowned in it as a kid. And there's so many great people in Boston and so many great people with the Bruins and the Red Sox. And I love them. I can say I loved the Yankees growing up, and I love the Red Sox now, and I love the Bruins. I'm still in touch with guys I worked with. Boston Garden, it's phenomenal to be immersed in that culture of the Bruins and the Red Sox, two teams with such a long history, unbeatable.
Other questions from the audience? Sydney, do you have one back there? I saw a hand up. No, my apologies. So, gentlemen, we have about a little less than 5 minutes. Yeah.
Not to switch speeds too much. I'm just curious, your thoughts on it. With the change in the acceptability now and the rise in gambling, fantasy, as well as major sports gambling, do you guys see any kind of changes in the radio and television, the way that they, I guess, put the product out there?
So gambling's effect on this?
Yeah.
Interesting. Gentlemen, anybody want to comment? I know we know the NFL is now setting up shop in Vegas. So
Yeah, every host on FAN on Fridays does football picks. Yeah. We end up, Craig's a big gambler, so we get people all week long calling, I lost all my money last week. I need three picks for tonight that are definite winners, So people really get into it. So that we cover it all the time. For a while there, especially on TV, they were kind of not interested in talking gambling, but it has become such a mainstream part of sports now.
Anybody else care to comment? Maybe, Chris, how would you counsel a client maybe from the sports realm to approach that subject? Is it becoming more mainstream? Is it still touching?
It is becoming more mainstream. I think it's gone from being like one of those whispered conversations to one that now people are more comfortable talking about publicly. Al Michaels talks about it. No, it was Brent Musburger,
yes,
who said he used to couch his gambling references, and now he actually works in the gambling industry. And he's like, look, everyone does it is not the right thing, but it's so common. To not talk about it is I think you're kidding yourself. The guy Chad Millman, who's the editor-in-chief of ESPN, the magazine, wrote a fantastic book called Laying the Wood. He basically spent a year in Las Vegas and got inside the gambling industry. Fascinating. And I think he and by extension ESPN, the magazine, have done it. They're the first outlet that's just like, look, let's deal with this openly. It drives sports interest. Let's just deal with it openly. And I give them credit for it because they're not encouraging gambling, but they're talking about it because people are doing it.
Any other questions from the audience? In the back, yeah.
Companies like Barstool Sports and Bleacher Report and SB Nation, are those threats to traditional sports media in the sense, or should they welcome them with open arms more?
I think they are traditional media now. I think 5 years ago you're like, who are these guys? But, I think that part of my take is hilarious. They kind of, and SB Nation, so I forget which one is doing magazine-type articles and long-form features. They are part of the mainstream. They're no longer a threat. I think if you end up at a place like that now, not necessarily doing the blog posting and clickbait stuff that still drives those sites, but everybody, just like gambling, everybody goes to that site. You talk to people on their phone. They're on SB Nation or Bleacher Report to find out about that, and they're doing high-quality stuff.
Anybody care to comment?
Yeah, I think at Barstool in particular, they're in an interesting position in that they're very popular. If we have one of those guys on the radio, especially among young people, very popular, but the thing that got them popular, it was that they were sort of this underground thing. And I think the minute you start becoming more popular and then start getting advertising and things.
When a guy like me starts listening.
Right, when we become aware of it. Then the minute you're not a subscription-based situation where your hardcore people are paying for your product and you start taking an advertisement from Subway, well, all of a sudden Subway doesn't want you joking about women, or then you're kind of getting a position like the rest of the media does, which is you got to kind of start watching the content you put out there. And the thing that got them popular was not watching the content that they put out there, or just kind of doing whatever they wanted to do. So it'll be interesting to watch them in the next couple of years.
Anybody else care to comment briefly? All right, so in our remaining moments, obviously one big question we haven't tackled. Yeah. Okay.
Just why sports and why communication? Why get a degree in sports?
Well, for me, I was just interested in talk radio. And like I said earlier, it's either politics or sports. And sports is a great escape for people. Sometimes sports, like people love sports because it's an escape. But when you had a situation like the Colin Kaepernick not standing for the national anthem, and we started pounding that every day, people would get angry. Like, I come here to get away from this stuff, and here we are talking politics and real life things. I don't want that. I want to talk about the game last night. So for me, I just got sports just so I didn't have to do political type stuff.
Gentlemen?
So I agree with Al, and I think my perspective is nearly the opposite, but I agree with him. It is an escape, but I also think for me, sports is an opportunity to tell stories that do intersect life and how we see life, and that's what gets me going about it. And I think being able to tell those stories at the end of the day is fun in whatever medium they end up being told.
Yes, why sports? Like, why major in it?
Why communication? Why sports? What can you do with it?
My answer, you're not going to like this, Jeremiah. My answer is why not? I don't know anybody who graduated with a degree in whatever they majored in who's working in that field. I majored in broadcasting. I haven't worked in broadcasting since I was 22. So it's educate yourself, no matter what the area is, and get hands-on experience, and then you'll find what you want to do professionally. So whatever you major in, it's great. As long as you're getting educated and you're learning things, it's going to take you in a direction you might not have anticipated. So,
George?
Well, I really enjoy that all you guys really say that it's an escape. And, it's baseball, it's football. There's a baseball expression, I'm trying to remember the author, but it was the guy who did Spencer for Hire, and his famous quote was, "Baseball is the most important thing in life that doesn't matter." And it could be hockey, football, basketball, it could be any sport. Because really, when there's not a terrorist attack, or a plane hasn't crashed, or there's not been a fire, or a shooting, that you know what the Rangers do matters to a lot of people, the Giants or the Knicks, it matters. But in the end, it doesn't matter. So yeah, it is an escape. And think about it. We weren't good enough to play professional sports, but we can go cover it. We can be one step away from it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people really, I can't tell you how many times people say, "Oh, you're living a dream." Well, yeah, if you like nights and weekends, yeah, I'm living a dream. And then one thing I mentioned to Jerry before, and I'll leave you with this, is people say it so many times, you finally come up with an answer, and the answer was, they go, "Wow, you go to the games for free?" And I'd go, "No, they pay me." And that's not bad. You get paid to go to games, that's not bad. But there's the other side of it too, which we've examined today. But if you're passionate, whether it's news, sports, politics, whatever, go for it. Go for it till it runs out of gas. Then do something else. Perhaps teaching.
Shameless plug.
I'm doing that now. So
we're right up against the clock. Very briefly, going down the panel once more. What does the next 5 years look like for sports journalism, for sports PR? Because these folks are going to be graduating. That's the world they're going into.
Guys,
what does it look
guys
like?
and gals. Sorry, guys, it's kind of a generic term. It is evolving so fast, especially the technology. That I went down. Some of you know I went down to spring training just to see a couple of games to visit my brother, and I ended up doing a story on beach versus baseball, and I shot and edited the entire thing on my iPhone. So you got to be on top of the technology. It's going so fast, and the energy is there, and everybody's your competition. That hasn't changed, but the type of outlets we have changed. The newspaper's dying, the magazine's dying. Okay, but cable. Internet, all those platforms, that's where it's going. Be technologically astute. And as we've said up here, you got to be a good communicator and you got to be a great writer. If you can't communicate what you want, if you can't tell a story, you'll get weeded out. That's about the best I can tell you. Chris?
Yeah, I agree with what George just said. The way technology is advancing and the platforms that are coming online is changing everything. The print newspaper, which I still, that's my bread and butter. I commute by train every morning. I love the New York Post, like physically picking up a newspaper and reading it. But I'm a dying breed, and I realize that. So be as digitally savvy as you possibly can, because it's the way things are going. I see more and more younger people who are really literate in 140 characters, but aren't necessarily great writing long form, and that bums me out because I love long form. But so try to be literate in both formats, you know.
Jerry? I think they nailed it. I'm not. There's not much more I can add. You know, be able to write, be able to tell those stories, separate yourself. Where it goes, I think that stuff will always find a home, no matter how sports plays itself out. Though I think, back to the gambling real quick, there's a guy on CBS Sports Radio out of Houston who's got the idea for a gamble cast to do and I could see that happening at some point. Twitter loves gamble cast because you're more interested in the over or the under when the game is out of hand. I mean, maybe one day in those ESPN where they have the coaches' rooms and the homer crowd, maybe they're going to have gamble cast.
And before you pass the mic, there's a curiosity with 30 for 30. I mean, a lot of the storytelling you're doing is not through the written form, but now video, right? I mean, so that plays a large role.
It's a different. You still need to be able to write as the backbone of that sort of stuff, but visually, it's way different. To get a quote from somebody for print, they can say it like this. They can say something really exciting like this, and in print, it's going to read great. But on camera, you'll never be able to use it. So there are these little differences in doing that. But it's being able to tell stories in the visual front is it's growing, and ESPN certainly cornered the market with 30 for 30 in that brand.
Al, the last remarks are yours, sir.
I just say you have to kind of be, no matter what your content is, you have to go where the audience is. So for us, for some people, they listen traditionally on AM radio, some on FM radio, some on television, some in podcasts, some on YouTube, some through Instagram, some through Twitter. Like, depending on the age of who you're trying to hit, you have to go to their platform, which is something we're trying to, be everywhere, so that your audience can find you.
Folks, having a round of applause for our speakers, and we're officially out of time. Thank you much for coming. In the back, if anybody wants any information on the PRSSA, the communication department, it's back there. We have the room till 5. Our speakers have various different schedules, but if you want to mingle about, we have to start cleaning things out. But thank you for joining us, and thank you once again for our speakers. Pleasure.